Okay, Mike,
Ready to go?
whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. Good evening, everyone. Before we start, I will remind council that this portion of the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. I will remind council to speak clearly and project their voice when they are talking so people viewing at home can hear. I will now do a roll call of council for the benefit of the public watching this meeting. When I call your name, please wave at the camera or say here or present. I'm Councilor Martin, I'm chairing this meeting. Councilor McMillan.
Present.
Councilor Merland.
Present.
Councilor Redicott.
Present.
Councilor Shantz.
Present.
Mayor Shantz.
Present.
Need a resolution to convene an open session. Moved by Scott, seconded by Larry. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest?
All in favor?
Oh, I forgot that. All in favor? Everybody's in favor, okay. Do any members of council have any declarations of pecuniary interest? We have one item to come forward from our closed session. That considering report C-18/2020, the council of the township of Woolwich appoint Wilson Law to the technical advisory group known as TAG for the term ending May the 31st, 2023. Would somebody like to move that? Mayor Shantz, seconded. Okay, Mr. Redicott, all those in favor? And that's carried. Val.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I'll read the introduction for planning public meeting. This meeting constitutes the formal public meeting required under section 17 and 34 of the Planning Act. This meeting is for information purposes only and no decisions will be made at this time. The application will be brought forward at a future meeting of the Committee of the Whole when staff has had an opportunity to review all submissions and prepare a recommendation. All those attending will be given an opportunity to speak and are asked to submit a written outline of their oral submission to the clerk. Please contact planning staff at the township to receive further notifications about the application. For zoning and official plan amendments, if a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Township of Woolwich to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of Woolwich prior to approval or refusal of a proposal, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. Also, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of Woolwich prior to approval or refusal of a proposal, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the public or person to add the person or public body as a party. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Jeremy Vink is our manager of planning, and I'll ask him to provide an overview of his report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. So I'm just going to go over the proposed official plan amendment for the township. This was originally planned back in March, but had to be delayed due to COVID. So we've now brought this public meeting forward. This is what you've known as our scoped official plan review, where staff have been working through the official plan that exists today to try to bring it up into conformity with a variety of the governing policies above us. That includes the provincial policy statement, the Planning Act, a place to grow, and the regional official plan. So we've fallen behind. This will try to get us back into alignment. Because of the amount of changes that have taken place since we last updated our plan in 2000, there's a number of significant changes in various chapters. And as a result, rather than trying to go through the plan and address what will change here and where, we found that the plan was changing dramatically to catch up to these changes. we're planning to basically delete the current plan and replace it with a new one. Some things to understand, though, we're keeping a lot of the fundamentals. The overall structure is going to remain the same. It is still mainly to focus on getting into conformity with all those policies above us. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of go through some of the chapters and the changes to highlight some of the bigger changes that have taken place. And after that, council can maybe ask questions. So first off, I'm going to take you to chapters 1 to 3 as outlined in the report. Our current official plan takes us to a timing horizon of 2016. As you can imagine, we passed that date. So we're now going to try align with the 2031 date, which is in the region's official plan. I'm just going to stop for a second there and just make a comment. The region is undergoing a review of their official plan. That is happening now. We'll be going on for the rest of the year and maybe into 2022. I don't know. 2021. I don't know. Their plan is going to change again, and they'll have projection dates of 2041 and 2051. We will in the future have to bring ourselves back into conformity with that. But our next plan is from a staff level, hopefully that when the region's done their plan and brought it back into conformity with all the policies above them from the province, we will do a major review of our official plan where we will look at the structure, we will look at the governing underlying thought process and do a whole visioning kind of process at that time. So that will happen once we, in the future, once the region's done their official plan. As I mentioned, chapters 1 to 3 here, we're going to bring it back. We're going to state how we're matching into policy. So we're just outlining the governing structure, the provincial policy statement, place to grow, a regional official plan, and that our plan must conform to those. Chapter 4, no major changes. This is the underlying structure, the vision from the past that we're not looking to change at this time. Okay. Chapter 5 is a bit of a rewrite. We had to incorporate the new regional structure from the regional official plan of the settlements. So we have the urban settlement areas, the township urban areas, that's Elmira St. Jacobs, the rural settlements, which are the smaller settlements that you see in some of the rural employment areas like Bass Place. And we're introducing the countryside and the countryside line as per the regional official plan. Here and again, also in this chapter, we're outlining and matching ourselves with the regional official plan in terms of population and employment growth projections for 2031. We're also aligning ourselves with the density target set by the region. That's the number of units per hectare that we're looking at in Elmira, St. Jacobs, Breslau, etc. So aligning with all those numbers. Chapter 6 is our rural area, which is the countryside. We're going to line the terminology back up with the regional official plan. Do some minor changes here, nothing substantial, but they're more keeping ourselves in line. Some minor changes that have happened over time. We're going to delete the infilling policies that have been existing in our plan, but do not conform at all to the provincial policy statement and need to be removed. And we're just going to acknowledge the regional airport. Our current plan doesn't really acknowledge it as it is today. So we're going to bring that in and acknowledge the Waterloo Region International Airport and policies around that. Chapter 7, this is the settlements. This goes through each and every settlement and speaks about how it should grow and develop. Again, we're going to bring it into alignment with that Chapter 5 structure of urban areas of Breslau and the Stockyards, township urban areas of Elmira and St. Jacobs, etc. So we'll be lining that up, bringing in policies about sustainable development to match with the region. We're going to update the mapping to match the rationalization that was approved. We're going to eliminate Elmdale as a settlement. So the region in their plan, Elmdale became part of Elmira. So we're now going to merge Elmdale into Elmira and do its staging policies. We're going to update the maps for the road networks for Elmira and St. Jacobs. Stockyards, as you note, is undergoing a current secondary plan process. So right now we're not changing the Stockyards policies. We're not making any edits. That'll be done separately through the Stockyards secondary plan and brought into this plan accordingly. So that'll be moving through the process separately. Also then to chapters 8 and 12, there's some minor, I'm going to say minor changes. Some just basic changes in the housing policies, some updating to the mineral aggregate policies to kind of match some of the changes that the province took into place, but we're not looking at major policy changes or updates in these chapters substantially. Chapter 13, this is the environmental policies. This is a complete rewrite. It was so far behind all the changes that have taken place. To get it in line with all the requirements, it is a complete rewrite to match everything up. Hopefully when we're done, it will look similar to all the rest of the municipalities in the region, but we'll be back in line with addressing protection of all the environmental features appropriately. Chapter 14 to 18, there's some changes there, just updating, especially the road hierarchy and the transportation policies, updating some mapping with that, including some active transportation policies accordingly. Chapters 19 and 20, again, some implementation, just adjusting to match with the Planning Act around public engagement, site plan control, complete application requirements. Chapter 20 is our definitions, and a number of the definitions are getting modified to match the provincial policy definitions or the regional definitions accordingly, just to bring that back up into alignment. We have received a number of different comments. I'm not going to go into the comments at this point. They're from various consultants, mostly Mr. Kineski and the Ontario Sand and Gravel industry, just giving comments, generally speaking, to the plan. Staff is working through these with the applicants and addressing their comments as best as we can. So just I'll note that. So in some cases, we've been getting some legal advice about wording to help everyone all of us through this process. Next steps. So right now we're just collecting all the public input and agency input. So as I mentioned, we had started this process earlier this year, had a public meeting, our public open houses. So we have some comments from those. We're now getting the public input through this formal public meeting. We've received most of the comments from the agencies. We're still working with the region to get their final comments into us. So our next step is going through all the comments and making edits accordingly so that we can hopefully bring a final plan to council later this year for approval. Once council would approve it, it would go to the region for final approval and hopefully not appealed. So if council has any questions, that's my summary of the scoped official plan. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Any questions? Councilor Merlehan?
Yeah, through you, Chair, to Mr. Vink. There's been some interest in the last couple of years about tiny homes and little settlements and such. I'm just wondering, you said in chapter 8 and 12 that you weren't thinking of any kind of revisions in the housing. Now, would this be an appropriate time to talk about those tiny homes? You know, they are, from what I understand, allowable in other parts of the region, and it's basically a Woolwich Township bylaw that at the moment that is hindering anybody to have a tiny home. So I guess, can you tell me, A, is this an appropriate time to talk about those or make any changes if that's something we want to look at? Or is there another process that we need to do to make that happen, or at least talk about it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good question. It is something that is an ongoing, more recent conversation, I would say, across North America. I wouldn't just say it's Ontario. So about allowing tiny homes. Is it the process to do it now? No, I think that gets into that bigger picture of visioning change, that you might want to consider that the next time round, which we aren't getting into at this point. But does it prohibit tiny homes? No. So when staff presented about a month ago and council approved the accessory dwelling units, we allowed essentially tiny homes in a rear yard as an accessory dwelling unit, okay? So we've already kind of allowed them as accessory dwelling units. They're currently not permitted under zoning as a permanent standalone structure as the main unit. And that's because the zoning bylaw sets a minimum size requirement. So it's not that somebody couldn't necessarily come in, say in Elmira, and propose this plan a subdivision with some tiny homes. They would need to amend the zoning to match, okay? I wouldn't say there's an official plan policy stopping them, okay? So it would be something that we would look at through, like, say, a plan of subdivision or a condominium type development. So the plan's not overly clear on it, but about where it could happen, but the plan doesn't prohibit it. It would be more of a planning process through a zone change or plan of subdivision.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? We will now hear from our delegations. We will ask speakers to keep their comments to 10 minutes. And our first speaker is Elisa Monteith, and you may start when you're ready.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of committee, staff, and members of the public that have joined us this evening. My name is Alicia Monteith, and I'm the Manager of Planning and Strategic Initiatives with Prisa Global Enterprises. So I'm here this evening with you to speak about the Script Official Plan Review on behalf of Prika Orchard, who owns 881 Weber Street North in the Township of Woolwich. Before I start, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening and to recognize the significant work completed by Township staff to bring this draft official plan forward, especially given the circumstances. For those that may be unfamiliar, 881 Weber Street North is a 68.7 acre property located directly to the east of the St. Jacobs Farmers Market, and it has frontage on Weber Street North, Lobsinger Line, and Apple Grove Road. The property is somewhat unique as a small portion of the property is located within the settlement area boundary, and a large remaining portion of the property is located in the prime agricultural area. As such, this evening, I just want to address both urban and rural policies. Starting with urban, approximately 4.7 acres of 881 Weber Street are located within the settlement area boundary and are designated urban area under Chapter 7 of the proposed official plan. This area of the property is located within the designated Stockyards urban area and is subject to the Stockyards secondary plan. I understand that the Stockyards secondary plan is currently undergoing its own separate review. However, we would just like to reiterate that the scope of the policies under section 7.27 or whatever section may the Stockyards secondary plan policies fall under should be established through that process, and that staff should potentially consider transitional policies should the official plan we are here to discuss tonight be enacted prior to the Stockyards secondary plan. Now, the remainder of my comments focus primarily on the 64-acre portion of Weber Street that is currently used for agricultural purposes. The property has been planted as an orchard with a variety of plums, apples, pears, and apricot trees, and currently has no agricultural buildings located on the property. As an active agricultural operation, the policies regarding prime agricultural areas and protected countryside have a significant impact on the viability of the operation. I'll provide detailed written comments separately to Mr. Vink with regards to this. However, I'll summarize my comments now. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I wanted to start off with Chapter 20, definitions, because I feel like a lot of our comments are focused on the interpretation and the definitions, and then therefore how those definitions and interpretation carry into the policies. So starting with Chapter 20, I would recommend that the definition of agricultural uses be amended to include all uses in the definition under the PPS. So the proposed definition as it stands right now does speak to on-farm residents, buildings, structures, and farm greenhouses. However, the PPS definition more clearly states that associated on-farm buildings and structures, including but not limited to livestock facilities, manure storages, value retaining facilities, and accommodation for full-time labor when the size and nature of the operation requires additional employment, are further clarified and included. At this time, I'd like to emphasize the value retaining facility inclusion, as the efficient operation of an orchard requires value retaining facilities such as cold storage, washing and sorting of fruit, and therefore the PPS recognizes these as an agricultural use, and we believe it should be recognized as such in the official plan. My next comment is regarding the definition of agritourism uses, and ask that staff consider it be amended to match the definition under the PPS as well. The proposed definition includes additional tests with regards to primary use on the property that I feel would be more appropriate incorporated under a policy section such as section 6.2.3, which already exists. The PPS and OMAFRA's publication 851, which is guidelines for permitted uses in prime agricultural areas, clearly states that the definition and criteria for agritourism use, and I would request that those criteria be incorporated into the policy section and that definition be matched within the proposed document. Thirdly, the definition of farm-related residential use, and we would request that it be amended to clarify whether full-time farm employee, which is not therein defined, and whether or not that recognizes full-time seasonal employees, as well as what would be considered full-time permanent or year-round employees. Under the PPS, accommodation for full-time farm labor is explicitly permitted, and when additional labor is required based on the size and nature of the agricultural operation, that is permitted. And we would ask for clarity from staff on whether the full-time farm employee, or as the definition says, a full-time farm employee, would also apply to full-time seasonal employees. Moving away from definitions and into chapter 6 now, a lot of our comments are, again, based on the interpretation of the definitions. So the first comment that I have is with regards to section 6.2.2 on farm diversified uses. We request that it be amended regarding the policy of determining the minor nature of the use to remove reference to financial investment and number of employees. Based on publication 851 and the PPS, one of the tests associated with determining whether a non-farm diversified use is appropriate is whether or not it's minor in nature. And the section as written proposes criteria for determining whether minor is in fact satisfied. However, as per publication 851 from OMAFRA, factors such as number or place of residence of employees, number of businesses, percentage of products sold that are produced on the farm, or floor area of buildings and outdoor storage do not have a direct bearing on the amount of farmland displaced or fully account for all the land occupied by the uses. And we suggest that the inclusion of these factors for consideration does not contribute to protecting agriculture, which is the intent of the policy. Our next comment is related to section 6.2.3, which is agritourism uses. We suggest that it be amended to either remove restaurant and gift shop or include a policy that indicates that a restaurant or gift shop may be permitted as accessory or part of the agritourism use in a limited capacity, perhaps related to the proportion of the floor area. So for instance, a small craft brewery opens on a farm. They would be considered potentially, or they would likely be considered an agritourism use. In order to sell alcohol and fully incorporate that brewery experience, the brewery must provide food of some sort and may wish to sell products or merchandise. In this instant, it would be interpreted that the brewery cannot have a restaurant quality kitchen and operate for for-profit food sales, and also could not have a gift shop component to their business. As I don't believe this is the intent of the policy to restrict this form of development, I would request that this section be amended just to clarify the limitations on these types of uses. My next comment is related to section 6.2.4.1, which is farm-related residential development. And in this, we ask two things for consideration. First, again, to clarify the policy intent as it relates to seasonal full-time employees and full-time year-round employees. So kind of leading back to what I mentioned in the definition, just to clarify that as well when it comes to creating new dwelling units and who qualifies as a full-time employee under the definition. And secondly, and more importantly, or most importantly, is to provide flexibility in the options for on-farm residential development. that does not hinder the agricultural operation or viability, but does not also restrict the form of new dwellings to bunkhouses or the conversion and expansion of existing dwellings. So I heard the comments between council member and manager Vink regarding whether or not this is within the scope of this review. And it's something that I believe we want to put forward and we want to discuss, because we have seen during COVID-19 that the struggles and the heartbreak of the agricultural community regarding housing of full-time seasonal farm employees that are necessary for the viability and efficiency of the agricultural operations. So I suggest now is the best time to review alternative options for farm operations that require full-time seasonal employees to manage their planting, maintenance, or harvest, and look at tests to broaden the ability to incorporate alternative residential uses while keeping in mind we want to protect agriculture, we want to protect the agricultural operation, and we don't want to take lands out of agricultural production. So I put that forward to staff for their consideration in that problem and this potential to address some of the issues we're seeing more so in Southern Ontario right now. So those are all my comments for this evening. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and for your consideration in this matter. And I look forward to ongoing discussions in collaboration with township staff. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council? Scott?
I have a question, but it would be more for staff. So if somebody had a question just for the delegation, I can certainly go after them.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay, ask staff the question.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. So my question is just I don't have the official plan memorized. I don't have the changes memorized. And going through your presentation, it's a shame most delegates like to prepare before they present to council. I didn't have a chance to catch all of those changes that you suggested. My question to staff is, have you had a chance to see any of these in advance? How do you feel about them? Perhaps this is something that we could refer to staff to consider and then get back to us.
Mr. Bates?
Yes, through Mr. Chair, to Councillor McMillan. So yes, we haven't seen these comments yet. So this is the first time we've heard from them in this regard. So we don't have this written out. So we will, as I think the delegate mentioned, that they'd be submitting us comments in writing so staff can then consider them. That's what we'll be doing. And we will, they're still anticipating that they will be receiving a few additional comments and staff will be reviewing them and going through them. So there was a number of comments made. We'd have to review them in detail because there's quite a few changes or comments suggested just to determine whether we think they're appropriate or not. And then generally speaking, when we bring the recommendation report forward, we do summarize whether we addressed comments and how.
So then, Mr. Chair, through you, I certainly don't have the expertise to move on any of the requests that the delegate has made here to council. But if Mrs. Monteith wanted to submit that in writing to staff, it'd be my, I would hope that could be submitted and staff could have a chance to review it.
Okay. Our second delegate is Karina Pryor, and you may begin.
Hi there. I actually was mainly just attending to hear the comments that Mr. Vink has already provided. I don't have any comments at this time. Again, if we do end up having any, we'll send something in writing. But thank you very much.
Okay, council members, anything? Being there's no further speakers, I declare this public meeting to be closed. So we go to presentations. Sustainable Waterloo Region Update. Tova Davidson is with us this evening, and she can begin.
Good evening. Can I have my slides up, please? Can you see slides? All I can see is a black screen. Is that the same for everyone? I mean, I can see the frame, but not the slides. There it comes.
We're ready to go.
What's that?
Not on our section. Still no? No.
There it is.
You can run it from here. It's okay with me if it doesn't go into presentation mode. I think you can show the animations this way. Yes?
Can you get it in your slideshow?
Yeah, start the slide.
Oh, okay, sorry. One second, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. My name is Tova Davidson. I'm the Executive Director at Sustainable Waterloo Region. It's my pleasure to be here tonight just to give you an update on what we've been up to in the last year and to say thank you for your partnership. For those who may not know, because of COVID, we weren't able to run our evening of recognition as we normally would this year, but we did hold our evening of recognition celebrations on the radio with the Mike Farwell Show. And Woolwich Township was one of the recipients of an award from us this year in partnership with all of the area municipalities in the region. That award was presented to those 8 organizations collaboratively because of the work that was done by all of you and your staff to move towards a more sustainable community. Those things that happened and came to happen among all 8 municipalities included joining the Regional Sustainability Initiative to work on your own targets within your carbon footprint for your corporate emissions. It also included everybody approving our long-term target of 80% reduced by 2050 for the community through the Climate Action Waterloo Region program. It included joining Partners for Climate Protection as part of that long-term target approval. It also included declaring a climate crisis or climate emergency. And so my thanks to you and thanks to all the work and your staff that's been done to move towards this, for us, historic moment when all the municipalities are now working together in partnership with us to build our more prosperous, cleaner, better community for everyone. Next slide, please. We've just gotten our year-end report completed and printed. And when I finally can get paper copies to you, you'll see that there's a map of all the places that we engage in this region and all of the places in one year that we actually held events or came to events. And certainly there were a number in Woolwich Township, and it's great that the Woolwich Township is right behind our logo in this image. Next slide, please advance. We can see that the organizations in our region have actually already proven that a low carbon business is not only possible, but actually profitable. And there's a number of case studies that we work with in the areas of energy, which includes waste and water, mobility, and green buildings, where you see that profitability and sustainability coming together in partnership. And that's the work that we're always trying to do, both at the community level and at an individual organization level, including organizations in Woolwich Township. And our work is to support that growth within the organizations and the community overall, so that we can have sustainable business practices and a more prosperous community. This year, we did a lot of outreach through the Climate Action Program to hear from the community what it is they wanted to have as part of our low carbon future. What did they see the community would be like if we got to an 80% reduction as a whole community by 2050? And before I share what they told us, I wanted to share that we actually went to all kinds of places, not to just where the sustainability people are. We went to hockey games and libraries. We went to a rodeo, which was in Woolwich Township. I went to that one, as well as a Mopar event. We went to community events and open streets and all of these places. So we could talk to everybody to ask them, what do they think a low carbon future looks like? And I wanted to share with you that the vision from the community, and we spoke to over 2,000 people, was that a low carbon future means that everybody is healthier. Everybody is more prosperous. There's a better sense of belonging. They did talk about clean air and clean water, but that wasn't the focus. The community understands that a better community requires us to be a low carbon community as well. So that was a really great thing to see and will be part of what we bring forward when the climate action long-term strategy and short-term plan comes back to councils later this fall. Next slide, please. Within the work that we're doing specifically and across the community, we are seeing that we are making movement forward and we've had some significant growth. For example, the Regional Sustainability Initiative went from about 70 members to 92 members last year. So we've seen some big growth. And that the growth and the reason these organizations are participating isn't just about how do they save money and how do they do things like change their light bulbs and get a new HVAC system. It's actually work in cultural change that people are starting to understand is part of the sustainability journey. And what it means is that we need to be thinking about a global need and then local actions. And we've heard that from other sectors as well. Think global and act local. So we are working to create that culture within organizations and the community. And the technologies already exist. Being a low carbon business in almost any sector is absolutely possible, and in most cases is actually more profitable once the transition has been made. So now we need to continue to drive our community towards that future. Next slide, please. So the Regional Sustainability Initiative is the program most people know us for. And if someone says that they're a member of Sustainable Waterloo Region, they probably mean this program. This is the program where we work with individual organizations, including yours, to help set targets to reduce your impact on the environment in the areas of either GHGs or carbon, waste, or water. And as a team, as a whole network, 65,560 tons of greenhouse gases have been committed to being reduced. Next slide, please. But the actual reductions this year now top over 69,000 tons. So what we're seeing is that these organizations are setting targets and they're not only reaching their targets, they're actually exceeding their targets, showing that this is absolutely possible. And these are all businesses that are still open and still operating and are profitable. Next slide, please. In travel-wise, what we've seen is real growth in the use of our transit passes. So for those of you who don't know what TravelWise is, it's the program that brings resources to employees through their employer to help them choose sustainable or active transportation. It's things like discounted bus passes, carpool matching software, emergency ride home reimbursement programs, employee engagement events, education, etc. And we offer this program in partnership with the Region of Waterloo. So you can see there was significant growth as well in this program. And we actually went up to 54 members from about 35 last year. So again, the need for sustainability action within businesses was becoming more and more obvious to our local employers and organizations. Next slide, please. In electric vehicles, we've had some really great growth. The big story last year when I came to see you was that we almost tripled our number of electric vehicles from 2017 to 2018. And I had an awful lot of people tell me they thought that we would see negative numbers. So a decline in electric vehicles this year because the subsidy was taken out, the $14,000 from the provincial government, replaced with a federal subsidy of $5,000. And so they thought that maybe there wouldn't be such growth. But if you could advance on the slides, please. We actually saw that that wasn't the case. We saw growth again. Another 500 cars were registered by January 1st, 2020, so the very end of 2019. And those are vehicles that are registered in Waterloo Region. So even despite there not being much in the way of subsidy, the growth in this area has been considerable and ongoing, and we expect that that will just continue. And all the indications we're hearing from the sector is that electric vehicle costs are actually looking to be at par within the next 5 years to a combustion engine car. So this is going to be a major way forward. And our work in this area isn't just about the vehicles, it's also in partnership with municipalities and organizations to help with the installation of charging infrastructure so that we know we are ready to not only support our citizens, but to support the visitors to our communities as well. Next slide, please. Climate Action, as you all know, is the program where we work on the community climate target, and that is through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And we have a short-term target that we are currently still working towards, and that's 6% reduced by 2020, so by the end of this year. And we need to re-inventory beginning next year to see how did we do on that short-term target. The numbers you're seeing here are the 2010 inventory and the 2015 inventory, and we saw a 5.2% emission reduction between that time. Next slide, please. But what we did see, as I already talked about, was the passing of our long-term target, 80% reduced by 2050. And so now the work is being done to try to get us towards that long-term plan. Next slide. If you look at the regional carbon footprint, if you could just advance, you'll see that there's some interesting pieces here. When we talk about the 5 areas where most of it comes from, it's workplaces, homes, transportation, agriculture, and waste. Next slide, please. And if you could just continue to advance just for a few slides, thank you. You'll see that we are stacking up here as it was in the original 2010 inventory. Homes being the 19%, workplaces in the orange, transportation in the green, agriculture and waste being the last 6%. That was the balance of the total carbon footprint of the region. Okay, could you do the same thing and give me the next stack? So that 5.2% reduction took us to a 1% reduction in homes, a 4% reduction in businesses and organizations, but we saw a 5% increase in vehicles. And that was because our rate of vehicle adoption in the region doubled our rate of population growth. So for every person that was added to the population, there were 2 cars registered to Waterloo region, showing that transportation is one of the major areas we need to look at in terms of creating our low carbon future. It also means that we need to consider that this rate of transportation vehicle growth is going to impact things like infrastructure, roads, sewers, all of that kind of work. And when we think about climate risk that's coming, and you think about what's going to happen with, heavy rains and more ice storms, et cetera, it's the infrastructure that's going to be impacted. And so when you think from a municipal point of view, this is an important thing to remember. Transportation is a major part of our footprint, and therefore a major area we need to consider as a community. Next slide, please.
Okay, your time's up, but I'll give you another minute or 2 to finish up.
I'll be super quick. Yeah, almost there. Last but not least, as you all know, is the Evolve 1 building. If you haven't been there yet, I would encourage you to please come. Contact me personally. I will make sure you can get in to see the building. It is Canada's very first net zero carbon net positive energy building. It was developed by the developer, the Core Group, and they own and manage this building, and it was done within their own budget. And it's a good enough business case. They're looking at building another. And we are working in that space at creating things like a City Lab program and other programming where we can help to solve some of the community sustainability issues collaboratively with our municipal partners as well as the rest of the community. Last slide, please. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you for the extra couple of minutes. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. And just again, thank you to council staff for your support, your participation, and all the great action that's moved forward this year.
Sean?
Thank you. Thanks for coming, Tobit, and for the summary of all the great work that you're doing on sustainability. What are you noticing with COVID this year? How is that affecting our sustainability, and do you see anything that will make maybe better progress because of it, or can you comment on that?
Thanks for the question, Chance. I see both pros and cons. So I'm going to start with the negative because I think the positive is stronger and I like to end on a high note. The cons would be things like lots more disposable items, lots more people using plastics, using the disposable masks, all of that kind of stuff. And that's concerning. All those things take oil, production, all of those kinds of pieces, transportation to get them to us. So encourage people to get reusable items as much as they can. On the positive side of COVID, we know already that our carbon footprint has come down because people aren't driving as much, businesses are closed, their actual physical spaces, the businesses are still operating from home. So there's all kinds of ways that our carbon footprint has come down. because of COVID. And so my hope is that some of those things can stay, even things like extra bike lanes, downtowns becoming more pedestrian friendly to give space for social distancing. All of those things not only help with sustainability, but also with wellness and sense of community and belonging. Finally, I think the biggest story here is that COVID has shown that we as humanity can make significant change if we think something's important enough. And so my hope is that we now know sustainability and climate change is important enough, and that we can mobilize to return back to a more normal way of living, but in a more sustainable way. The phrase that I've heard a lot is build back better, or the green recovery. So really excited to be part of that, and happy to work with you and your staff on any ideas on ways that we can do that, to take the silver linings from this very significant historic time to create a better future for everyone.
Thank you.
Council Burlehan.
Through you, Chair Martin, to Tova, thanks for your presentation. What you didn't, like, you had your presentation there, but there was some extra pages that I read through that was in our council package. And what was of interest was the Woolwich Township graph, where our carbon emissions actually increased pretty significantly in 2019. I'm just wondering if you can tell us, it says it's LED lighting and building upgrades. And I'm just wondering what 2020 will look like, because we just installed a fossil fuel system at the WMC that will transfer off of the electricity into using a generator. I'm just wondering if you can talk to our particular grid, because I looked at the other people in the program and they went down and we went up. So.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Merlehan. You know, it's not uncommon that there are blips up and then jumps down. What we find is that sometimes it's things like renovations have carbon footprint impacts. If you're changing things, installing things like that combined heat and power, that can have an impact. What we're looking for is the long-term trajectory. Things like a combined heat and power program, if you're going from electricity to natural gas, we'll see what the data shows when we get all the data at the end of the year, and actually it could be inputted month by month, so we could see it happening in more real time. But I do know that staff and you know, CAO David Brenneman have been working really hard to create that plan to go forward. And so to me, it's not about 1 year, it's about what's the path forward, and I do know that there are good plans to move forward for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Tova, for coming and bringing us this update.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night. Stay safe and sustainable, everyone.
Next, we move to delegations. Wayne Martin and Richard Brubaker. Zone change 5/2019. Mr. Vink, can you provide an overview of your report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the official plan amendment 1/2019, and that zone change 5/2019 for Wayne Martin and Richard Brubaker. This is the property at 4446 Church Street, just down the road from the township offices. So this started back earlier this year. They had a proposal to do a number of units on this property for a rental apartment. They have since revised the application since the public meeting and meeting with the neighborhood, well, communicating with the neighborhood. COVID threw a bit of a wrinkle in meeting with the neighborhood. So they've revised the application. They're down to 100 for a density of 60 units per hectare, and with a maximum of 106 from 60 units per hectare up to 106 units per hectare. This originally was higher. They were looking at 124 units per hectare. They have since also moved the building on the property to put it more centrally and they're also looking to reduce the setbacks in the frontage for the front of the building in terms of the building facade and front porches. And amend some definitions for the zoning amendment. So it's going to be an 18-unit building, 4 stories high is what is proposed. It has been reviewed by the region. The region reviewed from their end. They have reviewed the noise study that was submitted. The region will require a noise warning clause and some design requirements. These will all be addressed through a site plan process later on. And the region has been satisfied that the development conforms to the regional official plan. The township staff is also satisfied that it conforms to the regional official plan. In terms of the township's official plan, governing nature behind the township official plan is to allow for small town development and integrating various land uses across our community. So low-rise apartments, 3, 4, 5 stories, 3 to 5 stories high are still low-rise apartments. Very common still in smaller communities. You'll see them in Fergus, Elora, Elmira. For example, on Memorial Avenue, you'll see a number of low-rise apartments also integrated into the community. We're also integrating them into new subdivisions. You will think of the new South Parkwood subdivision that will have a proposed 6-story unit within that subdivision, for example. So this is not out of character for a small community at 4 stories. They've done the shadow review and substantially shown that the shadow study demonstrates that none of the adjacent properties will be in shadow all day long or significantly impacted to prevent the use of their properties. They will need some capacity assigned to them in terms of staging for servicing. Again, there's plenty of capacity in the system right now to accommodate that from the infill side, so there's no concerns there to allocate capacity to the development. In terms of height and building placement, as I mentioned, it's going to be 4 stories in total. Now, the front of the property is up against Church Street is going to be about 3.5 stories in height. As you go back, the property does slope to the rear, so the back of the property will be at a 4-story height. And as at the back of the property, we'll have the parking and then the access into the rear underground parking space. So from a street perspective, it's not as high as the full-on 4-story. In the context of the neighborhood, if you Church Street, for example, there are a number of dwellings there that are the older homes, 2-story, almost looking 3-story because of the height of their attic spaces. The existing building actually on site, if you look at it, is almost 2.5 stories because it's partially out of the ground in the front. So the height that we're looking at in 4 stories is not necessarily going to be dominating the road or anything like that. We have another 4-story just down from the township office that you almost don't notice in height relative to the other dwellings in the neighborhood. So it's not out of character again also. In terms of density, staff reviewed the density across the town, across the area. So gross density, it's in keeping, in the larger area. In terms of the net density, this is where they're proposing that increase. Again, it is not a substantial increase. It's relatively similar in terms of density as that 4-story unit right down next to us here in the township office. So it's going from 12 to 18 units. That's the density increase. So it would be permitted 12 units. If it was just to proceed, they're going to 18. So we're not talking a significant number of units that are being added as a result. It will encourage rental housing because they're proposing rental units in terms of 1 and 2 bedroom units. It gives an alternative form of housing that we don't see often as much as we would like, especially in the core area to be seen. It's accessible. It's on Church Street, easily accessible to get in and out to the core, to access even our WMC, to access the various commercial uses. It's on the transit route, so there's opportunities there. So it's great sight to see some of these types of things take place. So in essence, staff is saying that it conforms to the township official plan. It meets all the policies within there, and we would support the increased density. In terms of the zoning amendment, they're looking at amending the zoning with some site-specific zoning to recognize the building, like I mentioned. So the back part of the property does have some flood fringe and floodway zoning that needs to be maintained. Those will not be impacted. They'll consolidate these two parcels together and then to allow this all to take place. So one of the reductions is a reduction in parking spaces also from 1.5 to 1.33 spaces per unit. So they're going to give 1 space per unit plus some visitor parking. So rather than the required would be 27, they're just going down to 24. So it's a reduction overall of 3 spaces. Not significant again. They have justified it with a parking study to say it's in keeping with other type of units across the region. They're also providing some bicycle parking. And as mentioned before, they're on the transit route. So it gives people options for transit and they're within areas to walk to. So all in all, staff is not concerned about the parking reduction. They are asking for an amendment to the definition of amenity area. They're not reducing the amount of amenity area. They're just changing the definition to say it's not outside, but they'll include indoor spaces and patios as part of that amenity area. So they're providing patios and indoor spaces or rooms. As mentioned before, they're looking at amending some of the setbacks, especially along Church Street. The region is taking a road widening. So because the region is taking some road widening in front of them, they're going to reduce the setback to the front of the building and propose a setback also for patio spaces. It will keep the building in line with all the other dwellings along the street. So it's not going to come ahead of them. It's just going to allow the building to stay in line with the other properties along the street. So maintaining a consistent urban facade. So staff have no concerns with those reductions. As mentioned, in terms of some of the proposed setbacks, they're also actually proposing to shift the building to the middle and actually increase the setback from the west side from the west side, they're going to go from 7.75 meters to 6 meters. But on the east side, they're proposing a minimum setback of 9 meters, which they're actually increasing that setback, and that's to the property to the east. So some opportunity there just to move the building and make sure it stays within a building envelope that's anticipated in this proposal. A few other items. Some of the major comments that we're seeing from the community time and time again in the neighborhood was just issues around snow storage, lighting, garbage, grading and drainage, landscaping. So these items are all going to be addressed in the formal site plan. They've shown them on their conceptual plan how they're going to address them. So snow storage will be done on site. If they run out of room, they have to truck it out. Lighting will be covered under our site plan that they can't project light onto adjacent properties. Garbage will be stored indoors. Grading and drainage has to be addressed on site and will be finalized through the site plan process, but they're showing they can accommodate all the grading and drainage on site and then send it to the back of the property through an easement to the creek. They're not impacting the neighboring properties. One of the other comments was around traffic in and out of the site. They've addressed that. There's no concerns from the region in terms of proximity to Snyder Avenue. Building design will also be addressed somewhat more so at the site plan process, just to review that it's in keeping with everything. In terms of privacy, they're just proposing some fencing and landscaping that will also be provided at site plan to protect, to say that the fencing will go in and be maintained, and they'll provide some landscaping in terms of tree placement. All in all, staff is supporting the proposed application. We're also proposing that in the zoning bylaw, we restrict it to the 4-story height, we restrict it to the 18 units. And as you can see per the recommendation, staff is recommending to amend the official plan with the official plan amendment as attached, the zoning bylaw amendment as attached, and that council allocate the 18-unit apartment or capacity or 32 people for the sewage capacity to the development.
Thank you, Jeremy. Council members have any questions? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Through you to Jeremy. Jeremy, on the south side of Church Street, there's what looks to be a sixplex just east of the property. I just wonder if, for comparison, can you tell us about the height, how the height would compare to that particular apartment?
So I don't have the heights of existing buildings. I'm trying to picture the sixplex, which one it is and how it relates. Sorry. So
Sorry, I'm on Google here. I'm just sort of flipping around the neighborhood a little bit.
So I mentioned a lot of them are very similar in terms. There are 2 to 3 story height structures in that area. So like I would see this being slightly higher. You're maybe talking a story higher in height. There and again, like I mentioned, if you take the building next 2 doors down from us at here at Church Street, if you look at that relative to the 2-story house next to it, it doesn't look substantially taller, even though it's a full 4-story structure. In this case, this parcel on this side of the road, you know, we're going to have that 3.5 story. But if you go across the street, directly across almost on Church Street, those properties are higher up on because the ground elevation is a bit higher, and plus they're already taller structure. They're tall structures. So all in all, I don't think it's going to dominate anything. That's what I'm saying is it's going to be maybe a story to half a story taller than some of the structures in the area, which is not abnormal to any difference between us in height between a single and a 2-story. For example, the difference in height.
Thank you.
Council McMillan, did you?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I was wondering, first of all, I'd just like to thank staff and the developers who clearly have done a good job genuinely addressing the concerns of the citizens in the neighborhood. You know, we had some citizens come to the council chambers and address council when this first came to us. And it really feels like this report, the work that's been done, has genuinely addressed those concerns. Certainly not everybody's going to be happy and not everybody got everything that they wanted, but it feels like a real effort was made to do the things that we need to do for our township and Elmira here with increased density and housing options and address those concerns. So thank you, everybody. My question is, when this project first came to us, now it's looking at an 18-unit project. Was it at that time as well? Were they able to keep the number of units the same?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, they've actually reduced the number of units. I think the original was 21. I'm drawing a blank. The applicant can confirm. They're speaking next. So, so they did reduce the number of units because originally they're proposing 124 units for the density, and now we're down to 106.5 for the net units per hectare. So they have reduced the density.
Chair, if I may follow up. Sorry, my internet froze there. So what do we know what the number was of the units that they proposed? Sorry, I apologize for putting you on the spot here. It's 18 now. Would it have been, I seem to think like 23 is sticking in my head. Is that?
It's 21 or 23. The applicant can confirm.
Okay.
They're going to next, but it was around that number, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council Merlan?
Yeah, through you, Chair Martin, to Mr. Vank. When we have our official policy and planning specifications, like so many parking spots per density or units or whatever, and offsets from the rear, offsets from the side yards and things like that. I'm just wondering, why do we have those rules when they can kind of be, you can make an argument for not applying the rules. And I say this in the context of this past month, I was dealing with a local resident with your department who had a shed at the side of his yard. And you know, after, you know, as soon as the township found out about it, it was like, hey, you can't have that shed there, even though it's been there for 10 years. Wasn't beside anybody, it wasn't affecting anybody whatsoever. And the problem was with the department was that we'd be setting precedent across the township, have a shed beside his home. You know, in this case, and in a lot of other cases with planning, it seems like the rules can be negotiated rather than just applied. Like if a developer wanted to go above and beyond and provide much larger setbacks, you know, nobody's going to complain about that. But in this case, they're asking for reductions of setbacks, reductions of parking, and staff is okay with that. And to me, it, you know, applying the rules needs to be consistent. So yes, this is apartment building is something we want in the township. You know, there's a benefit to the township as a whole and to Elmira as a whole. But we're allowing the negotiation, and it almost seems like, well, you know, we have to allow these things to happen so that the developer can make money and make these things worthwhile pursuing. But I'm wondering if you can, you know, address that concern. And I think I picked up on that in some of the comments from the neighbors that, you know, perhaps they will bring that up too. So I might as well just bring it right out into the front as to why we have these two standards in planning.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't, there's not two standards. Nothing prohibits somebody from coming through a process and going through the proper process, whether it's a minor variance or a zone change, and making the justification under the policies to make some adjustments to a zoning. So the official plan governs us and gives us direction. If the amendment under the zoning fits within that and they can still address everything, we'll consider it and review it. So the person has to go through that process, and they have gone through that process. They have brought in reports and justified how they can address the parking reduction and why they say it's appropriate in this case. So in all cases, would it be appropriate? Maybe not necessarily. In this case, because we're talking, you know, there's opportunities here because of transit and walkability. There's some flexibility and the number of units. They've identified that across the region that this is an acceptable standard that works. You know, we can review that and we'll take it into account and we determine whether it's appropriate or not. And that's, you know, the same as if somebody comes in with a shed. Nothing stops them from coming in to make the application and staff reviewing it. We'll have to review it in context with the policies and determine if it's appropriate. Same as this case. So we're looking at all those items saying, what is the issue? How is it being addressed? Is there flexibility to make adjustments? And what is the appropriate nature of those adjustments? In some cases, you don't always get it. In some cases, it does work and is appropriate, and we review it in that context.
Okay, yeah, I guess the difference being, you know, a resident who wants a shed there to go through the process, the minimum cost is about $1,000 to go through a process, and that's not hiring a planner to come up with a report to justify why a shed is there. So I mean, there is two standards in my opinion, and I just think if we have all these policies and somebody buys a piece of land, you know, they're welcome to do whatever they like with that land, you know, within that zoning. And perhaps the project needs to be scaled to the size of the land. But I just wanted an explanation as to the different standards that are being applied. And in this case, it just seems like another standard, but I understand the process. So thanks for your explanation.
Councilor Shantz.
Thank you. My question is through you to Jeremy about the fence and the wall. There was some concerns about that being really high. And I'm wondering which side of is it the neighbors that are going to see the wall as well as the fence, or is it this property that is going to actually see the wall and the fence?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Shantz. So the neighbors on the townhouses on Snyder Avenue, their backyards, they will see the wall and the fence. So the retaining wall and the fence start further back on the property for the most part. So it's the last 2 units or so that will see the majority of the wall and the fence. They have pushed the wall and the fence into the property a bit so that there's room for the swale for drainage to go through and potential plantings to soften that retaining wall look. So there still is a fence. They've dropped the height of the fence and the retaining wall, or the overall height, from what was originally proposed by some grading changes. So it's not as high as what was proposed originally. As you notice in the staff's report, I outlined that they've reduced it a bit, that they're gonna do some plantings there. And just noting that right now, if you go look at those properties, they're looking at a hedge right now to some extent anyway, that is blocking that view. So I don't foresee it being a significant prohibition to prevent the development from taking place.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? We have two delegates registered for this meeting. The first is Megan. Are you with us?
Yep, hi,
You can begin.
great. Good evening, Madam Mayor and councillors and members of the public as well. My name is Megan Garrity. I'm a planner with GSP Group. I'm here this evening to speak on behalf of Wayne Martin and Rick Brubaker, who are also, I believe, on the line. I believe they were able to call in. Also joining us this evening are Kevin Deeth from K-Smart Associates, and I believe Robert Turner of Fried Architects, and Hugh Handy also from GSP Group. So we're all here, and they're available if there are any specific questions related to engineering or the architecture. I was hoping that staff could bring up my slide presentation for this evening. Thanks. So you can skip to the next slide. Jeremy already provided a very thorough review of the application, and I appreciate all the questions and discussion that's already taken place. So I won't dwell too much on some of the background context, but just to give you a bit of an overview, this is where the site is located on Church Street. You can go to the next slide. I've just zoomed in on the image there. So as you probably know, it's two separate properties. 46 Church Street, the building has already been demolished, and 44 Church Street, there's a two-story triplex there. There are two existing driveways as well. Will be required to have a road widening, and generally the site slopes towards the back, towards the Wiggle Drain. And next slide, please. It's just a view of from the street for anyone who's not familiar. So that's the one vacant lot on the left, and obviously the existing building there on the right. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give an overview of the original proposal. So I know one of the councillors had a question about what was proposed originally. So we did have 21 units proposed originally, and that was brought forward at the public meeting. And along with that, we had 22 parking spaces. So we had proposed a 1-to-1 ratio for parking with only one visitor parking space at that time. There was a drive aisle along the westerly side of the property, and we were asking for a reduction to the amenity space, as well as the definition change that Jeremy had mentioned earlier, as well as some of the setback reductions. So along with this concept, there was a fairly substantial retaining wall that ran along the majority of the west property line. So if you advance the slide, please. You'll see I just tried to highlight here on the map, the red line along the westerly property line that shows a portion of where the retaining wall would have been, so that all of that piece that's highlighted there is now removed or reduced significantly, and there would be just a fence in that area. And then you'll see a two-way arrow a little bit north of that, kind of in the back parking area. That's where we would be proposing to move the parking over to the right to provide some additional space there for drainage where the parking would be, and that would all be on this site. Some of the other substantial changes obviously is the reduction in the units from 21 to 18. We've switched this side of the drive aisle from the west side to the east side, which I'll get into a little bit more detail in a minute as to what that impacts. And also we moved the location of the underground parking entrance from the side of the building around to the back of the building. Next slide, please. So in addressing some of the comments You'll notice that we haven't proposed a change to the building height, as we think that the height is appropriate in this location. It's close to the downtown and along a regional road. We also, as Jeremy noted, will be going through the site plan process, and we'll be working towards creating a detailed design both for the site itself and the building. And the owners have noted in previous submissions that they're intending to use a combination of brick or stone with some siding to try and complement the existing character of the area. So on this slide, I just wanted to note, there's a lot going on, but I wanted to describe or go through some of the changes in more detail. So in reducing the number of units, we've reduced the overall density of the site. So to the 106.5 units per hectare. The required amenity space, we've been able to increase that. And so we're no longer asking for reduction in that. The amount of parking, we still need a reduction, but there is a substantial change in my opinion. We now have 18 spaces plus 6 visitor spaces. So that's a big change from the 1 visitor space that we were providing before. That's due to the overall reduction in the density, but also as a result of the change in the location of the underground parking entrance, we were able to accommodate 1 more space underground. And as Jeremy mentioned, so this would be a reduction of 3 parking spaces overall from the required. The removal of the units also allowed us to provide more amenity space within the building. So we're hoping to put 2 amenity rooms on the ground floor of the first floor, as well as a larger amenity space on the 4th floor with a balcony facing the back of the site. That's what we've got on our floor plans currently. For the moving of the parking entrance, we think that this will have, to the underground parking, I think this will have less of an impact on the neighbors as it is a little bit further from each of them. And also, as I mentioned earlier, it allows us to create 1 more parking space. The moving of the building over to the other side of the property has resulted in us needing to reduce the easterly side yard setback to 6 meters from 7.5, which is required. And the change ultimately allows us to reduce the size of the retaining wall that was originally proposed, as I mentioned earlier, and allows us to provide more plantings along that side if that is something that we can accommodate through the landscape plan in the site plan process. Also, the change increases the separation on the easterly side of the property. So we were deficient on that side previously. So now because we've got the drive aisle on that side, we've got more room. Ultimately with the change in location of the drive aisle, we're further from the intersection, which was noted as a concern at the public meeting. Overall, we believe the proposed development is appropriate as it's located on a regional road in an existing built-up area. It's close to the downtown and other recreational facilities and parks in a serviced area of the community. The development will also help provide a greater variety of housing options to current and future residents of Elmira. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, have members of our team on the line if you have any specific questions related to engineering.
Council members, any questions? Councilor Redikoff?
Yeah, can you explain what the road widening will do to this development? Like, is it to access the parking lot, or is it just a regional requirement to do this on this kind of development?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. It was a regional requirement for the road widening to happen.
And will the developer pay for that, or is that part of the township development costs?
Through the chair, we are required to provide a survey to the region to accommodate the transfer, and we've already completed that survey.
Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? We have a second delegate. Walt, are you with us? Walt,
Yes,
you're up.
yes, I'm up.
You can begin.
Thank you. Okay, I have a copy of this 52-page report that Mr. Vink has put through. And I see that it was reviewed by Mark Pomponi, and a final review was the whole senior management team. So I have to assume that there were at least 6 people who reviewed this and agreed with it. I have some concerns. If you would switch over to page 2, in the middle under background, it says this property is 0.17 hectares. That's a pretty small piece of property. Over to page 3. The original development was, of course, a 21 unit. After the public meeting, they revised the plan. If you look at everything there, the only revision was the reduction of 3 units. Nothing else. All of the setbacks, everything is the same. It goes halfway down and it says that it is now a 4-story, 18-unit rental apartment building. If you go down to the bottom paragraph, it says this is a development that respects the scale, physical character, and context of the established neighborhoods. The proposed 3-story structure is in scale and in keeping with adjacent homes and apartment buildings and will not alter the character and context of the area. If it was a 12 or a 3-story building, I wouldn't be talking to you. It's a 4-story building. And it's on page 13. It says it right there. And it has a peaked roof. So actually it's 4.5 stories. Switch over next to page 4. This is where you have your township official plan. It says to maintain small town character. It says this form is to maintain traditional development pattern of small Ontario town with no disruption to existing residents. Also, such as low apartments in a manner that is sensitive to the adjacent land uses and designed to complement the area. From Mr. Vink's comments, he isn't going to be living next door to this building. We are. Go over to page 5. In terms of height, the area has some older, tall-story homes, true. Along Church Street, the proposed apartment will be 3 to 3.5 stories, but at rear 4 stories, given the slope of the property. The unit is not out of character or substantially differing in height from other buildings in the area. I have a problem with that. It's a 4-story building with a peaked roof. It will be higher. If you went over, or anyone went over and looked at the property, you would have seen that the building or the property at 44 Church West has a retaining wall on the west side. That retaining wall is 4 feet high from ground level to the bottom. That means that 46 is 4 feet lower than ground level at 44. If you look over towards Snyder, 46 slopes that way. The ground level at Snyder, in my estimation, is probably between 5 and 5.5 feet lower than ground level at 42. This building is going to seem a heck of a lot higher to those people than 4 stories. Again, on page 5, the official plan seeks an approximate density of 14.8 units per hectare. The development of this site with 18 units would still result in density below the maximum 14.8 units per hectare. Am I reading this wrong? When was 18 units per hectare lower than 14 units per hectare? I don't understand that at all. The bottom of the page, the high density rate will result in a modest increase in the number of units that could develop on the lands from approximately 12 to 18 units. 18 units, an increase of 6, that is 50% increase. Tell me, would any of you be happy if tomorrow you were told your property taxes were going to go up 50% and to consider it to be modest? I don't. It's not modest. Go over to page 7. This speaks to amenity areas. There are areas there. The only area they're going to change the description of the areas. Snow storage. This is a major issue with me. Take a look at page 13. The description shows on the west side of the house, snow storage.
East side. East side.
East side of the house, excuse me, on our next to our property. Our property at 42 extends 175 feet north from Church Street. The first 129 feet, then there is a retaining wall. The next bunch of property, 46 feet, is 4 feet lower. The slope from Church Street is slightly north. If they store snow, the complete length of my property along the driveway is all going to melt and leach down into my backyard patio area. That lower section, we have a patio, we have a very large rose garden and a very large lily garden there. I don't understand their thinking there at all. That section also says, if necessary, snow will be removed from the site. Who's going to decide if it's necessary? It's a cost. I don't think that's going to happen. Landscaping. They talk about plantings and fencing. We get onto the top of page 10, privacy. The proposed location of the building combined with fencing and landscape minimize the privacy issues. Minimize. The west side of our house has 10 windows. 9 of them are bedroom and bathroom. The east side of that building is going to have 9 balconies, all along looking down into our rooms. If they put a privacy fence there, that's going to be 8 or 10 feet. That covers the lower level, which is parking. It doesn't do anything for the top 3 stories with all those balconies. They mention trees. If they plant trees, there'll be saplings. I'll be dead in my grave before those trees mature and give us any privacy. It just won't happen. They take 25, 30 years to mature. Get on a little farther. You go back to page 45. The purpose of the amendment to increase the maximum debt density requirement from 60 units per net residential hectare to 106.5 units. That's over 2/3 increase. That's not just a little bit, that's a lot. The bottom, it says the basis of the amendment. From that, I take this is the reason that Mr. Bink considers you should make all these changes to allow this building, because he wrote this. You look at the first section here. The higher density rate will result in a modest increase in the number of units from approximately 10 units to 18 units. Modest. 10 to 18 is double, almost double. I don't call that modest. It's to accommodate housing, retirement, alternative form of housing. Okay, agree with all of that. But you come down to the bottom line, and I think this hits it all. And I don't know why it's even there, but it appears on page 6 and it appears again on page 45. The additional units will increase the economic viability of the project for the owner. When did it become the concern of planning about the return on investments from anyone? That stinks. Anyways, if you go to the back of this report, you will find a number of letters from all of these people, all the ones down inside and ourselves. At no point are we saying, don't build an apartment building there. We realize they're needed. We don't doubt that. What we're all saying is, give us a break.
It's too high.
It's too high. It's far too high. It doesn't fit. If this was a 3-story unit with 12 units, you could take all that snow storage and put it at the north side, and it would leach back into the creek because you would need 6 less parking space. And according to Mr. Vink in there, it says 12 units would be acceptable.
Walt, your
I think
time
I've
is,
said enough. Go ahead.
you need another minute to finish up?
Nope.
Okay, Mr. Vink, would you like to respond, please?
You're breaking up.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the snow storage, yes, snow will be along that side. They, through site plan, will need to show and demonstrate that snow will melt and drain over their property, not the adjacent property. So they can address, their engineer could explain that more so, but that's what they need to do through the site plan process. And our engineering staff will review and have to make sure that that takes place. That is something they are aware of. If the snow can't be accommodated in that area, yes, the applicant will need to truck it off site. That'll be at their cost. So that goes into the development agreement in terms of site, the snow storage. I will omit the error on page 3, should have said 4-story. I should have written 4. I was mentioning 3 because I lost the frontage is a 3 to 3.5 stories in height across at the frontage, and it slopes to 4. So I was trying to mention the 3 across the frontage matching the rest of the street, but 4 is more correct. You're correct. In terms of the rest of the information, we still have to, with the planning staff is dealing with the reality that the province and the region are looking at greater densities, and we have to accommodate them. We kind of talked about that earlier tonight in the official plan review briefly, that we have to change densities and hit new targets. So the targets we have today in our official plan are out of date and not in keeping. So that's why we've seen in the last few years some changes in density, okay? That's why the apartment down the street has an increased density in an official plan amendment also. That's why we've seen some of our new subdivisions change some of the density requirements. In terms of page 5, the reference to 14.8 units per hectare, I'll note that's referring to gross density. Gross density is in a broader area, so we're talking a neighborhood area. So we're not talking the site, we're talking the broader neighborhood. So the official plan speaks to gross as 14.8, and I calculated out as best I could, given the surrounding area, that it still fits within the 14.8. From the net density, which is the site, that's where the official plan amendment is coming in. And that's where we're seeing the change to the proposed 106 units and a slight and an increase. And And that's where staff is saying that the increase seems still appropriate given all the targets we're trying to achieve provincially, as well as something that can still maintain the character of our smaller community. As staff mentioned, you can drive to other communities. You can drive to Memorial Avenue and see apartments right next to other houses. You can drive to Fergus Elora nearby and you will see 3-4-story apartments in residential neighborhoods too. So this is not an uncharacteristic thing to find in a small community or a community of Elmira's size. You can drive to other communities. You're going to see it. They will be accommodated and they'll be there. And as I mentioned, we are seeing 6 stories in the South Parkwood, for example. We're seeing other units in other subdivisions. So it's not out of character to see types of development like this. You know, like I mentioned, staff is putting into the zoning bylaw the requirements that they meet certain setbacks, that be in there. So they're going to set that envelope in the middle of the site. We're going to set the height at the 4 stories and cap them at the 18 units so they can't change in the future without an amendment. I will note that's important because currently the R6 zone refers to the R7 zone requirements for apartment buildings, and there is no maximum height for an R7 zone property. An apartment building has no maximum height. So in theory, it could have been a taller building and still 12 units or something like that. So we're setting a height and we're going to cap them at that. So recognize there are things that are taking place here to maintain the character and still keep it in context with the neighborhood. I think that kind of comments the majority of the items raised. I know the applicant or the neighbor disagrees, but planning staff still feel that it is an appropriate development to the site.
Okay, I forgot if council has any questions of the delegate. Any questions by the delegate? Councilor McMillan?
If there's no questions for the delegate, I'd be prepared to move the recommendation. I'd like to speak to it if there's a second as well.
Would somebody second it? Councilor, you said Fred, I don't see him here,
Fred seconded it.
but he's not here. I can't see that.
I'll second it.
Okay,
I'll
Fred,
second. I'll second.
any further discussion? Councilor McMillan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, through you. I'm certainly not unempathetic to the concerns addressed by the neighbor here tonight. This project is desperately needed. We need different types of housing in Woolwich. I feel like there are certainly places in North America, in Ontario, in Southwestern Ontario, where the need for developer profit has superseded residents' needs. And I don't see that as happening here. I understand not wanting the increased density and this specific building, but I see a genuine effort by our staff and our community developer to address the concerns of the neighborhood and of the residents, and I applaud everybody for that. In particular, you know, the retaining wall was a big problem for the residents that spoke at our first public hearing about this. They changed the parking to address that retaining wall. The parking minimums were addressed. This is a building that the parking minimums, I thought they made sense before, and the developer made further concessions to address the concerns of the citizens. I live in this neighborhood. It's a very walkable neighborhood. You don't need cars like you would need if you were in South Parkwood, or if you were in Breslau, or if you were in, you know, if an apartment building ever gets built in Heidelberg. It's different where it is. It fits the neighborhood. The sixplex on the opposite side of Church is up on a hill, and it's, you know, well over 2.5 stories. It's going to be similar in height. The 4-story building further east on Church Street. It's going to fit the character of the neighborhood. I'm not unempathetic to the concerns of the delegation tonight. I you know, understand the frustration, but we are in desperate need of this type of housing in Woolwich, in Southern Ontario. So I move the motion. I'm in favor of it. I'm going to vote in favor of it.
Any other comments? I'll ask the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Moving on. Unfinished business, we have none. Consent items, none. Takes us to staff reports and memos. Regional Council composition review option. And we go to Val for that. Do you have a report for us?
Just a moment, please. With you in a moment. Thank you.
Okay.
Report C19, Regional Council Composition Review Options and Consultation Process. For the benefit of the viewing publics, Report C19 is in the Council Information Package and available on our website at woolwich.ca in the Council meeting schedule. It gives more information on what I'm going to say here and has a copy of the Regional Clerk's Report attached. Similar reports are going to the councils of the cities of Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo, and the townships of North Dumfries, Wellesley, and Wilmot. There is a review currently underway by the Council of the Region of Waterloo about its composition. This review is now mandated by the Municipal Act to happen after every second municipal election. Regional Council, currently made up of 15 members, must make a decision on its composition review by the end of this year, and the next review will be due after municipal election 2026. As outlined in Report C19, Regional Council must do two things by the end of this year. A, they must pass a resolution confirming status quo for the 2022 and 2026 municipal election with the current composition. Or B, they must pass a bylaw to change the size of regional council. The chosen option, either resolution or bylaw, must be endorsed by a triple majority, which is explained in the report, and confirmed by Regional Council on the schedule that is outlined in both the township and regional reports. If this process does not finish by December 31st, 2020, the province may step in and change the composition of Regional Council for us. The province was asked if it would consider an extension to the December 31st deadline, and the answer from the province was no. The Regional Clerk's Report outlines 4 options to be considered by each of the lower tier councils. Those 4 options are: number 1, status quo with the Regional Council staying at 15 members. Number 2, an allocation of 1 regional councillor for 25,000 residents in an area municipality based on largest township population. This would increase the size of Regional Council by 8 members for a total of 23 members. The third option, an overall target of 30,000 residents per regional councillor for all of Regional Council based on previous representation. This would increase the size of Regional Council by 4 members for a total of 29 members. And the last option, a system of combined urban and rural representatives. This option would increase the size of Regional Council by 4 members for a total of 19 members. Report C19 explains each of the 4 main options and includes pros and cons. The basic pros and cons are what I know at this point. I have not done an in-depth review of each point, at each of the options at this point. But it all comes down to how many regional residents 1 member of council represents. The township report also offers a few other options for educational purposes to show you other models that might have been considered if we had more time. As noted in the Regional Clerk's Report, reducing the size of regional council was not included as one of the 4 options, and that report gives 4 reasons why. Those reasons are: A, the Waterloo region already has the smallest regional council compared to the other regions and has the same or fewer councillors than similar sized single-tier municipalities. The second one, on average, each regional councillor represents a population of 39,904, which falls within the range of the other regions. The third reason, reducing the size of council would reduce the directly elected urban councillors, which is not in line with the principle of representation by population. And lastly, should regional council be reduced, then the region would need to look at introducing a complex system of weighted voting for regional council to reflect some resemblance to representation by population. In conclusion, the following recommendation is now before Woolwich Council for consideration. A, that Woolwich Council receive report C19 for information. B, that Woolwich Township Council endorse option 1, status quo for regional council composition. And C, that the clerk for the Township of Woolwich be directed to submit a copy of report C19 and the adopted resolution supporting status quo to the regional clerk's office for consideration. This recommendation was made because of the tight timelines. Just a minute, sorry, pardon me. I'm starting to laugh, that's never good. It's not COVID. This recommendation was made because of the tight timelines we're all working under to avoid provincial involvement. Excuse me. I swear it's not COVID. No, they're crawling away from me. Please, they're rolling away. Don't step in. It's okay. And also because status quo seems to be the most reasonable option considering population estimates up to 2020 and looking at targets for the number of residents represented by each member of regional council. For these reasons, staff recommend the status quo 15-member regional council composition for the upcoming municipal elections in 2022 and 2026. There are opportunities for anyone to have further input. Anyone may be a delegation at the Regional Finance and Administration Committee on September 15th, or at the public meeting that Regional Council will hold on September 30th. Delegations are also permitted at the Regional Council meeting on October 14th, where Regional Council will decide whether it's going to pass a resolution for status quo or pass a bylaw changing its composition. After that, Regional Council will have its decision circulated back to the area municipalities and try to achieve that triple majority endorsement. Thank you, Councillor Martin. I have nothing further to add.
Thank you, Val. Committee members, have any questions? Councillor Berlin?
Not a question. I'd move the recommendation of status quo for the next 2 seasons for the recommendation that staff put forward.
I have a seconder. Councillor Shantz, any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Is there any other business to bring forward? Outstanding activity list. We have 5 items in correspondence. Does anybody want to speak on any of them? Mayor Shantz?
I'm just wondering if there's a desire of council to support the North Dumfries letter or motion regarding gypsy moths. They're basically asking M&R to do a surveillance program and to look at whether it needs to be dealt with. I know that they like certain trees. We have one tree that's got quite a few of them, and I ran into someone the other week who was walking and talked about the number of gypsy moths this year. I know it is a problem there. They run it in cycles, and this is a particularly bad year for it. So,
Councilor Berlin?
Yeah, I would support that resolution that they put forward. I had a tree killed on my property, so damn you, gypsy moths.
that and the squirrels.
Councilor Shantz?
Yeah, I would also like to support the Township of Wilmot for their broadband internet.
Okay, we should finish the first one first.
Okay, we'll deal with the first one first. I had actually had it marked down too because there's a lot of moths around my place. So we'll support that, just not.
No, we need a motion.
Oh,
Motion of
motion.
endorsement.
Okay, somebody move that.
I'll move it.
Mayor Shantz, somebody second, Councilor Merlehan, further discussion?
It's not a conflict of interest that 3 of 5 counselors have trees affected by these gypsum mounds.
Never mind.
It's not my property. I know it's not gonna.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. And Township of Wilmot. Any discussion there? Is it support for that? Okay, would somebody move that we support that? Councilor Shantz? Somebody second it? Councilor McMillan, any further discussion? I'll call the question. And that's carried. Public notice, none. Notice of closed meetings, none. Notice of motion, none. We're at the end, adjournment. Does anybody want to go home or you want to stay? Councilor
They're
McMillan.
all home.
All those in favor? Everybody's going home. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.